Chapter 4. The Continuous Revolution, and the Chinese People. Mao's opening to the United States was a major ideological as well as strategic decision. But it did not alter his commitment to the concept of continuous revolution at home. Even in 1972, the year of President Richard Nixon's visit to China, he caused to be distributed nationwide a letter he had sent to his wife, Jiang Qing, at the beginning of the Cultural Revolution 6 years earlier. The situation changes from a great upheaval to a great peace once every 7 or 8 years. Ghosts and monsters jump out by themselves. Our current task is to sweep out the rightists in all the party and throughout the country. We shall launch another movement for sweeping up the ghosts and monsters after 7 or 8 years, and will launch more of this movement later. This call to ideological commitment also epitomized Mao's dilemma as that of any victorious revolution. Once revolutionaries seize power, they are obliged to govern hierarchically if they want to avoid either paralysis or chaos. The more sweeping the overthrow, the more hierarchy has to substitute for the consensus that holds a functioning society together. The more elaborate the hierarchy, the more likely it is to turn into another even more elaborate version of the replaced oppressive establishment. Thus from the beginning Mao was engaged in a quest whose logical end could only be an attack on communism's own institutions, even those he had created himself. Where Leninism had asserted that the advent of communism would solve the contradictions of society, Mao's philosophy knew no resting place. It was not enough to industrialize the country as the Soviet Union had done. In the quest for the historic Chinese uniqueness, the social order needed to be in constant flux to prevent the sin of revisionism, of which Mao increasingly accused post-Stalin Russia. A communist state, according to Mao, must not turn into a bureaucratic society. The motivating force must be ideology rather than hierarchy. In this manner, Mao generated a series of built-in contradictions. In pursuit of the Great Harmony, Mao launched the 100 Flowers campaign in 1956, which invited public debate and then turned on those intellectuals who practiced it. The Great Leap Forward in 1958, designed to catch up with the West industrially in a 3-year period but which led to one of the most pervasive famines in modern history, and produced a split in the Communist Party. And the Cultural Revolution in 1966, in which a generation of trained leaders, professors, diplomats, and experts were sent to the countryside to work on farms to learn from the masses. Millions died to implement the chairman's quest for egalitarian virtue. Yet in his rebellion against China's pervasive bureaucracy, he kept coming up against the dilemma that the campaign to save his people from themselves generated ever larger bureaucracies. In the end, destroying his own disciples turned into Mao's vast enterprise. Mao's faith in the ultimate success of his continuous revolution had 3 sources: ideology, tradition, and Chinese nationalism. The single most important one was his faith in the resilience, capabilities, and cohesion of the Chinese people. And in truth, it is impossible to think of another people who could have sustained the relentless turmoil that Mao imposed on his society. Or whose leader could have made credible Mao's oft-repeated threat that the Chinese people would prevail, even if it retreated from all its cities against a foreign invader or suffered tens of millions of casualties in a nuclear war. Mao could do so because of a profound faith in the Chinese people's ability to retain its essence amidst all vicissitudes. This was a fundamental difference with the Russian Revolution a generation earlier. Lenin and Trotsky viewed their revolution as a triggering event for world revolution. Convinced that world revolution was imminent, they agreed to cede 1/3 of European Russia to German control in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk of 1918. Whatever happened to Russia would be subsumed by the imminent revolution in the rest of Europe, which, Lenin and Trotsky assumed, would sweep away the existing political order. Such an approach would have been unthinkable for Mao, whose revolution was largely Sinocentric. China's revolution might have an impact on world revolution but, if so, through the efforts and sacrifice and example of the Chinese people. With Mao, the greatness of the Chinese people was always the organizing principle. In an early essay in 1919, he stressed the unique qualities of the Chinese people. I venture to make a singular assertion: one day, the reform of the Chinese people will be more profound than that of any other people, and the society of the Chinese people will be more radiant than that of any other people. The great union of the Chinese people will be achieved earlier than that of any other place or people. 20 years later, amidst Japanese invasion and the Chinese Civil War, Mao extolled the historic achievements of the Chinese nation in a way that the dynastic rulers could have shared. Throughout the history of Chinese civilization, its agriculture and handicrafts have been renowned for their high level of development. There have been many great thinkers, scientists, inventors, statesmen, soldiers, men of letters and artists, and we have a rich store of classical works. The compass was invented in China very long ago. The art of paper making was discovered as early as 1,800 years ago. Block printing was invented 1,300 years ago, and movable type 800 years ago. The use of gunpowder was known in China before the Europeans. Thus China has one of the oldest civilizations in the world. She has a recorded history of nearly 4,000 years. Mao kept circling back to a dilemma as ancient as China itself. Intrinsically universal, modern technology poses a threat to any society's claims to uniqueness. And uniqueness had always been the distinctive claim of Chinese society. To preserve that uniqueness, China had refused to imitate the West in the 19th century, risking colonization and incurring humiliation. A century later, one objective of Mao's Cultural Revolution, from which indeed it derived its name, had been to eradicate precisely those elements of modernization that threatened to involve China in a universal culture. By 1968, Mao had come full circle. Driven by a mixture of ideological fervor and a premonition of mortality, he had turned to the youth to cleanse the military and the Communist Party and bring into office a new generation of ideologically pure communists. But reality disappointed the aging leader. It proved impossible to run a country by ideological exaltation. The youths who had heeded Mao's instructions created chaos rather than commitment and were now in their turn sent to the remote countryside. Some of the leaders initially targeted for purification were brought back to re-establish order, especially in the military. By April 1969, nearly half of the party's Central Committee, 45%, were members of the military, compared with 19% in 1956. The average age of new members was 60. A poignant reminder of this dilemma came up in the first conversation between Mao and President Nixon in February 1972. Nixon complimented Mao on having transformed an ancient civilization, to which Mao replied, "I haven't been able to change it. I've only been able to change a few places in the vicinity of Beijing." After a lifetime of titanic struggle to uproot Chinese society, there was not a little pathos in Mao's resigned recognition of the pervasiveness of Chinese culture and the Chinese people. One of the historically most powerful Chinese rulers had run up against this paradoxical mass, at once obedient and independent, submissive and self-reliant, imposing limits less by direct challenges than by hesitance in executing orders they considered incompatible with the future of their family. Therefore, in the end, Mao appealed not so much to the material aspects of his Marxist revolution as to its faith. One of Mao's favorite tales drawn from classical Chinese law was the story of the foolish old man who believed he could move mountains with his bare hands. Mao related the story at a Communist Party conference as follows. There is an ancient Chinese fable called The Foolish Old Man Who Removed the Mountains. It tells of an old man who lived in northern China long, long ago and was known as the Foolish Old Man of North Mountain. His house faced south and beyond his doorway stood the two great peaks, Taihang and Wangwu, obstructing the way. He called his sons, and hoe in hand they began to dig up these mountains with great determination. Another greybeard, known as the wise old man, saw them and said derisively, "How silly of you to do this! It is quite impossible for you to dig up these two huge mountains." The foolish old man replied, "When I die my sons will carry on, when they die, there will be my grandsons, and then their sons and grandsons, and so on to infinity. High as they are, the mountains cannot grow any higher, and with every bit we dig, they will be that much lower. Why can't we clear them away?" Having refuted the wise old man's wrong view, he went on digging every day, unshaken in his conviction. God was moved by this, and he sent down 2 angels, who carried the mountains away on their backs. Today, 2 big mountains lie like a dead weight on the Chinese people. One is imperialism, the other is feudalism. The Chinese Communist Party had long made up its mind to dig them up. We must persevere and work unceasingly, and we, too, will touch God's heart. An ambivalent combination of faith in the Chinese people and disdain for its traditions enabled Mao to carry out an astonishing tour de force. An impoverished society just emerging from a rending civil war tore itself apart at ever shorter intervals and, during that process, fought wars with the United States and India, challenged the Soviet Union, and restored the frontiers of the Chinese state to nearly their maximum, historic extent. Emerging into a world of 2 nuclear superpowers, China managed, despite its insistent communist propaganda, to conduct itself as essentially a geopolitical free agent of the Cold War. In the face of its relative weakness, it played a fully independent and highly influential role. China moved from hostility to near alliance with the United States and in the opposite direction with the Soviet Union, from alliance to confrontation. Perhaps most remarkably, China managed, in the end, to break free of the Soviet Union and come out on the winning side of the Cold War. Still, with all its achievements, Mao's insistence on turning the ancient system upside down could not escape the eternal rhythm of Chinese life. 40 years after his death, after a journey violent, dramatic, and searing, his successors again described their now increasingly well-off society as Confucian. In 2011, a statue of Confucius was placed in Tiananmen Square within sight of Mao's mausoleum, the only other personality so honored. Only a people as resilient and patient as the Chinese could emerge unified and dynamic after such a roller coaster ride through history.